Okay, cool. So this is our Women in Trade Unions event run by Unison West Berkshire. We have the amazing Sarah Hacker here to talk to us today about women in trade unions. And I've also got Joan Ball, our co-secretary, our co-branch secretary, hosting this with me as well. And I guess the first thing I was going to ask really, Sarah, is kind of what has been your experience in trade unions and what's your kind of background in trade unionism out of interest?
Okay, so gosh, one of the first things I did when I started work was join a trade union a very long time ago when I was at Waitrose. I joined the GMB because Waitrose don't have a trade union because they have staff association instead. And even back then, I don't know how I knew, osmosis probably, that it's best to be in an independent trade union when you're talking about workplaces, that staff associations just don't cut the mustard. I left Waitrose, went to Prudential, and that's where I joined the predecessor union of Unite, which is who I'm a member of now. So it was MSF back then Amicus, and then Unite. And not long into my time working for Prudential, our department was threatened with redundancy. They were moving it to Northern Ireland. And I felt that I had to do something, so I became a rep. That was probably around 20 years ago now. And I remained a rep. I did lots of training with the trade unions. Towards the end of my time in financial services, I was taking part in TUPE negotiations and pension negotiations as well. So I really did use my time in Unite in the workplace really well. But in 2019, I decided to leave financial services and moved into the charity not-for-profit sector, which meant standing down from all my Unite positions because I was no longer a workplace rep. But I've still remained active within Unite and still support their campaigns. So at the moment, I'm a Unite member and have been for a very long time. And generally at the moment, it's supporting their campaigns within Reading is the main work that I do. So yeah, I've done all sorts of things in that time, including speaking at conferences. I've even had a motion put to Unite's policy conference and accepted. So made a change for members that way, and that was very exciting.
What motion was that out of interest that you managed to put forward?
Yeah, it was about putting together a document around fibromyalgia, which is a condition that I have for workplaces. So not many people understand what fibromyalgia is or know how it affects people on a daily basis. And in the workplace, it's quite difficult because you can't see it. There's nothing you can see, but it can make you tired. It can make you confused. It can have memory issues. You get pain as well. And so my motion, which was supported by my colleague Phil, went forward and was debated and accepted. And they actually did create the pack. And I was sent one, and it was a very, very proud moment. So that pack is available for Unite members and their employers, so they will understand what fibromyalgia is and how to support their employees with it.
Oh, cool. That must have felt like quite a positive moment to get that through.
It really was. It was really exciting. And luckily, I'd had some training through Unite about public speaking and speaking at conferences, and so it didn't hold too much fear, the actual speaking part. But it was quite exhilarating, especially when I got sent it and I could see the physical pack, and that me and Phil together had made a difference potentially to hundreds of thousands of people across the UK who could go to their employer and say, look, this is what I have and this is how you can help me.
Yeah, that's excellent. Was that part of what encouraged you to be a rep as well, out of interest, or was there anything in particular that encouraged you to get involved? Or
I think, I don't know, I've always had this desire to help people. So I was a girl guide, and then I worked in customer services at Waitrose before I became a graduate trainee. And it's just been in my mind and in my family, I suppose, to do your best for your community. And so my community at the time when I became a rep were my colleagues in financial services, and we were threatened with losing our jobs. And so I thought, well, this is something I can do, and stood up and volunteered to become a rep. And obviously went through the training to do that. And I found I really enjoyed making the difference. And I really enjoyed the support of the trade union network as well, and the opportunities it's given me over the years too, which have been very, very different to the opportunities that were available to me at work in my day-to-day job, which didn't really change. But my opportunities in the trade union meant that I gained skills that meant I could make that career switch in 2019.
yeah, I think quite a lot of people say that. That's quite a big thing, I think, in the trade union movement, that people don't always associate with it before they get involved. Then they get involved and they see that it actually has all these other benefits they don't always realise, isn't it? I think that you can do with trade unions.
Yeah, it's not just about them being there when things get tricky, although obviously it's very important that they are there. Just look what
Yeah.
happened to P&O employees last week. but there's huge opportunities, even if it's on a small level, to gain skills, whether it's because you've become a rep and you gain those skills that way, or there's free training available through the trade unions. I gained a qualification in equality and diversity through the trade union, which is free to me, and then is now on my CV, and as well as extra training I received as a potential political candidate too. So it really has benefited me no end, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, have you kind of linked it into the Labour Party stuff you've done much as well over the years, do you think?
Yeah, I really have. Not so much at the beginning, but as time wore on. So like Unison, you've got your Labour link. Unite
Yeah.
has a similar structure. So at the moment, I sit on our Labour Liaison Committee, which looks at how we're going to work with our Labour candidates in councils, mostly across the southeast. And also it meant that because I was a Labour member, that means I could be a delegate from Unite to the Labour Party conferences, which I found very interesting. Really enjoyed the first couple of conferences I went to. And it also gave me an amazing opportunity just by pure luck. And they knew that I had the public speaking skills, which can be frightening if you're not confident. So what happened is that the Labour Women's Conference was going to put forward their first motion to the main Labour Party conference. And Unite's motion, which I presented and was carried, was selected to be that motion that went to Labour conference. So I actually stood up at the Labour Party conference and presented and spoke, and to the motion, the first ever motion to come from the Women's Labour Party conference to main party conference. And that was a really
pivotal
special
moment,
moment.
isn't it?
It was, and it was all about women and the economy, and how women have been adversely and most impacted by austerity. And it was a wonderful thing, and I knew in my head simultaneously it was not only going to be in front of the thousands of people in the conference hall, also it was being put out on BBC Parliament. But I always say this when it comes to public speaking, because I used to dance, I'd much rather be stood still talking than prancing about in a tutu. So talking to thousands of people is far less terrifying than dancing around on a stage. So it wasn't too bad. Obviously your knees go wobbly afterwards, but that was a really proud moment for me to be able to do that, and that will always be something that I did, and it can never be taken away. So that's really special.
Yeah, that's it. It sounds like a really special moment. That sounds excellent. It's one of the other questions I had for you as well was what is it that you think makes it so important for women to get involved in trade unions as well? I mean, I know in Unison for us, about 70% of our membership are women, about two-thirds, I think, of our membership at West Berkshire Council are women. They disproportionately tend to be low paid as well, so they need union representation because they're the ones that are exploited the most. So is this the kind of stuff that you've experienced as well in your times in the union? Just, why you think it's so important for women to get involved?
Yeah, it is, because women outnumber men when it comes to trade union membership. There's more of us, but I don't think we are properly. You can see that reflected in the committee structures within trade unions. Obviously, we've got Frances O'Grady at the TUC. Unite have just elected a female general secretary, which is brilliant, Sharon. But if you look at your regional committees and your sector committees, do they truly reflect the people that are in those branches and in that region? And I don't think they do yet. And I think for women it can be quite intimidating to make that step from member to rep, because I suppose there's still quite an old-fashioned view as to what a rep is, and that's standing on picket lines and going into tough negotiations. But we're more than capable of doing that sort of thing, and we probably don't realise how we actually have those skills already just through day-to-day life. Being a person living in society, you have to be able to negotiate. You might negotiate your insurance bill down, or going to your kid's school to have a chat with the head teacher. So you've got those skills already, but it's making that step and putting your hand up, which is the tricky bit. But once you've made that step, I find when you get your training in place for being a rep, you discover that you have those skills, as I said already. And the trade unions, in my experience, are very supportive, but we do need more women to make that step from member to rep. Then get involved in your regional structures and then really start to influence, because women are discriminated against throughout nearly their whole time working. So you know, a younger woman experiences discrimination around pregnancy, maternity leave, you know, even discrimination, even if they don't ever intend to have children, there'll always be that, you know, that thought at the back of someone's mind, oh, will she go off and have kids? And, you know, maybe we should choose a man, because they won't. Although men become fathers, I'd like to point out, it should be equal. And then you've got, you know, women tend to have the potential to have more illnesses, not mortality, but morbidity. So you've got that challenge as well. I mean, fibromyalgia, for example, which I've got, is more prevalent in women. And then you get to the menopause. And then again, it's something that's getting there in the workplace. And it's something I'm very interested to talk about as I approach that age. But again, workplaces don't understand what a woman is going through, and they don't understand the changes, and they don't get the support they need. And I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and they were saying that a lot of women leave work in their early to mid 50s because of menopause, and there's not the support there that they need. I know what it was. I was talking to a colleague at work for the charity I work to, and how that their community outreach project for women has disproportionately more women needing help with employment and unemployment in the late 40s, early 50s, simply because of that. And so we need to have that collective voice as trade union members and as reps, to make sure that this discrimination is removed from society, removed from our workplaces. And we've still got the gender pay gap. It's very slowly being chipped away, but my goodness me, it's taking far longer than it should. You know, it's outrageous that we're still looking at some companies 14-15% plus difference between the you know, the wages of men and women, and it needs to have women at the negotiating table, and we need to have women creating the policies within our trade unions, and we need women to use our voices and say, you know what, this isn't fair, and it needs to move faster than it is, because if we let things carry on as they are, I think the statistic was something ridiculous, like it would take, I don't know, 70-80 years for the gender pay gap to be removed. And you know, we've been slogging away from this from the late 60s. So it's vital that women are out there and are front and center of all negotiations when it comes to their livelihoods.
Yeah, I'd say as well. I mean, we actually had the stats come out on the gender pay gap in West Berkshire Council today. I haven't had a full look at them yet, but I had a brief look, and it doesn't make for good reading. There still is, you know, I mean, as gender pay gap, and we'll be publishing stuff about that this week, because we're saying, yeah, it's not good enough that there's still as big a gap. There shouldn't be a gap at all, but it's the fact that it's as big as it is terrible. And with the menopause as well, I think that's such an important point, because we're just about to start in West Berkshire again. We used to have, before I worked for Unison, and before the pandemic, they had a menopause cafe, where women could come along, they could talk about their issues with the union, and, you know, the union kind of helps them. And it just kind of created a nice, safe environment for women to talk about that, when that's something that they don't normally get, and they feel like they can't talk about these issues in the workplace. And I think providing those kind of spaces and giving that kind of support can just be so important, can't it?
Yeah.
And Unison in West Berkshire were instrumental in implementing a menopause policy, and we're one of the few local authorities to have one of those. And it is thanks to our women's officer.
It's absolutely vital, because it's something that happens, and it's something that's natural that happens, but it's difficult, and we shouldn't be penalised or feel that we have to leave the job because we're not getting the support we need.
Yeah, it feels like it should be something that's much more, you know, I think it's good that unions are taking more notice of it now, because it feels like something that wasn't as in front and center as it used to be in the past, but now it feels like it's kind of taken a real more front seat in terms of saying that these are the kind of issues we need to focus on, because it affects so many of our workers.
Yeah, and it's trade unions that take the lead in these innovative policies too. It's like the period poverty was pushed by the trade unions as well, and they've made huge leaps and bounds in that. So even if it's something small, like your workplace now provides free period products, we've seen you know, I think is it Scotland that where period products are free. We see them free in schools, and it was the trade unions once again that were highlighting the issue and pushing it forward. And it's when we have a maybe not so employee friendly government that it's the trade unions that come into their own, and making sure the workers' voices are heard and listened to. I mean, it's ironic, isn't it, with the P&O ferries debacle? It was disgraceful what happened to their workers there. But only now are the government saying that, oh, well, if you're working out of British ports, you should pay at least a living wage. That should already have happened. If we really care about workers, it shouldn't take something like 800 being sacked. If the government truly respected workers, and we're not talking like the highfalutin ones, but the average everyday worker, this should already have been in place. This protection should have been in place. And the fact that the boss of P&O went, oh yeah, no, we did it because we didn't think the unions would agree to sacking these 800 workers. But of course they wouldn't agree to it. But they seem to have got away scot-free. So we need our trade unions. We need that strength. We need to every worker join a union, and then we've got that ability to influence what happens to our lives in our workplaces. So everyone I talk to, I always say join a union. Always.
Yeah.
I'll never not be in a union.
I mean, I'm interested. That kind of leads me to my next question, which is going to be: do you have any tips for sort of getting more women involved, women specifically involved in trade unions? Because we're sort of looking to have a bit of a recruitment campaign at West Berkshire Council at the moment. I just wondered if you had any tips for getting more people involved or becoming more active reps and things like that.
Well, the first thing, and this is the one thing we were taught early on, is that if you don't ask, you don't get. And it really does help if and one woman will ask another woman, would you consider becoming a rep? Because I think that's powerful. And if you have the opportunity to sit down and have a chat about what it involves, because it's a fear of the unknown. What time commitments will there be? How will it fit around my caring responsibilities? What training is there to help with the lack of confidence that I feel? But if you have a friendly conversation, women will soon understand that they've already got those skills. The trade union movement is one of the most flexible things out there because they understand about care and responsibilities, and if they don't, you tell them and it gets sorted out. And just have that friendly conversation and tell them what the difference they can make, because they can make a huge difference in excuse me a second. Sorry, my son has just come home from school. Caring responsibilities.
Right.
He's rustling crisps. Yeah, I would say the first thing you do, get one woman to ask another woman. Just give all your women reps that target to ask at least one other woman if they'll become a rep. And I'm sure you'll see it pay dividends. It's all, there's no harm in men asking, but it's the power of one woman to another woman, I think.
Yeah, and it's having those conversations, isn't it? I think once you get that ball rolling, it's almost can become like a domino effect, can't it, sometimes?
Yeah.
And hopefully that's what we're seeing in West Berkshire.
Hopefully. And you don't have to, do the big high-powered negotiations. You can just be a workplace rep, or you can be an equalities rep, or you can be just looking after your team, for example. You don't have to worry about going and doing big pensions or pay negotiations. You don't have to worry about having to go to conferences. It's there if you want to do it, but it's not compulsory. You can make a difference just by supporting your immediate team, to be quite honest. And that's how I started off, helping my team of individuals. When they did move the jobs over, but I got moved to a different department. I then became a rep there. And it just went on and on and on. I gained qualifications, I gained experience, and it led me to where I am today. So today, I'm a Labour councillor. I'm confident with public speaking. I've spoken at council, goodness knows how many times. And it all started because I felt I needed to do something to protect my colleagues way back 20 years ago. And I'd have been just as happy if I'd have just continued being a rep. And not ending up in all the different, regional or national committees. It would have been fine if I just made that little difference to supporting somebody who maybe was having mental health problems or, didn't get a particularly good review. That would have been enough. Yeah.
Yeah, it's having that little step, and then you don't always know where it takes you, isn't it? And I'm hoping when this goes out to our members as well, they'll see your story and be sort of, inspired by it and think, I want to get involved, which I'm hoping as well.
Yeah, just see where it takes you. That's the wonderful thing about it. You may end up doing stuff you never expected. Just a very short story about the first time I ever spoke at conference was I was there as a delegate to our finance sector conference in Scarborough, I think it was, and we had a motion going in from our branch about outsourcing, because that's something that was a real issue with the finance sector and still is to a degree. And our lead rep was going to present the motion, but something happened and he had to go and sort this thing out. And I said, oh, don't worry. I said, if you're not back, I'll do it. Thinking he'll be back, not a problem. I'm just being, helpful. Every time the doors at the back did this, I was like, oh, no, that's not him. And I was checking, no, and we were getting closer and closer. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to do this. And so I made a few notes and I took the motion up with me. And because I was kind of unexpectedly forced into it, I got on with it, did it. My knees did go peculiar afterwards and I had to go and get some fresh air outside. but I surprised myself that I was able to do it. And you know, that's one of the joys about trade unionism is you will surprise yourself.
Yeah, do you
And
find it kind of
it will
gave you that
unlock
confidence that
it would unlock previous parts of, you know, your skill set that you didn't know you had. And it is so rewarding as well. And you know, you can just go and support a march about the NHS in town, you know, just little things, but they all count.
yeah, everything, anything you can do to help, isn't it? And then having those conversations is, yeah, what gets the ball rolling.
Yeah, it's like the
Yeah,
saying, isn't it, that even if you run slowly, you're always lapping the person on the couch. And so even if you
yeah,
only do something small, you're doing more than nothing. So
yeah,
it does work, it does count, and it's really important.
yeah. Like it's quite effective. Out of interest as well, my next question was to do with: do you think there's any changes that trade unions need to make themselves to make them more accessible to women? So when you look at, you know, trade union history, I looked up a little bit for the International Women's Week and how even, you know, back in the day when women were leading movements, you know, in the 1800s, it was always kind of men trying to not let them take over. And then even when you get to the 1970s and you had the Dagenham march, I think the way they were dealt with was very much seen as, you know, unions were for men, not for women. That was only like 50 years ago. I don't think we've moved from those times now, but I still think there's more that unions can do. And is there anything that you think you'd like to see changed to make them more accessible to women?
I think one of the things they need to consider is caring responsibilities. I know it's you know, a traditional stereotype, but it is a fact that women tend to have more caring responsibilities, whether that's children, elderly parents, you know, adult children with additional needs. We do, and so they need to just think about how they can make meetings easier. Obviously, now we're all familiar with Zoom and Teams. That can overcome some of those problems, because before the pandemic you'd always have to travel to, for me it would usually be Slough or London for meetings, and I'd have to get someone to collect the kids and all this stuff, and so it was sometimes difficult. Thank goodness that my mum was really helpful. So that's one thing. But I think something that needs to be done is sometimes the men in the room need to wonder if they need to share their thoughts, and they could just leave some space for women, because women tend not to be so forthright, and they may think, oh well, he's speaking, I don't need my voice to be heard. If there's more opportunity for space for women to speak, I think that would be really helpful too. And as I said, I think we need to see more women move up through the ranks. I think we need to see more senior reps as women. We need to see more of the actual union officials across all unions be women, and then they'll, you know, we'll get that greater understanding throughout the whole structure. So I think we're getting there, but there's still more can be done, definitely.
Do you think having more sort of women's only spaces would help in that? Say if you had events for women only and they felt more comfortable going to those, do you think that would then help build the confidence for them to get involved in events that were, you know, union wide as well? Do you think that's something that I know a few unions do that? I just wondered if you thought that was a helpful
Yeah,
idea as well.
I think to start with that's helpful, but obviously in the real world, in the workplace, women are going to have to work alongside men and learn how to get their voices heard, you know, when there are men speaking. So women only spaces are useful. I mean, I was in the regional and national women's committee for Unite, and they were good talking spaces. We had the opportunity to discuss women's issues, but ultimately those issues then went on to the main structure of the trade union, and women needed to have their voices heard. I think at things at speaking events like conferences, there needs to be thought towards a gender balance on speakers, because traditionally men are very confident to go up and, yes, I want to speak, but we need to hear women as well. So there does need to be that. And I know some people are uncomfortable with positive discrimination, but until it's going to happen equally naturally, I do think we need an element of positive discrimination just to get that wheel in motion. And when the sort of the structures are equal and women are given an equal opportunity to share their opinions and their thoughts, there does need to be that little extra push and shove to get those women's voices heard.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of links into what you were saying before as well, isn't it? Where, you know, majority of members are women, but as you go higher up, it tends to be disproportionately men.
Mhm.
And, you know, you kind of need to get that positive discrimination to get, because you want, you know, the structure to be reflected throughout, don't you, really?
Yeah,
That's how many women members there are. That's how many women reps you want to be and on committees. And it feels like if that went up, it would feel better, wouldn't it, if you managed to get those structures in place? Yeah, I think that positive discrimination helps quite a lot to force that change into place, isn't it, and make sure that
Yeah.
that takes
And
place in the future.
And that's across all the equality strands. That equally stands for disabilities, LGBT plus, and minority ethnic and Black members too. We you know,
Yeah.
naturally it's not happening. Something needs to be done to make it happen. You can't just
Yeah.
leave things as they are.
Yeah, that's why I think it's so important to try and get more events to get more women involved, isn't it? And try and make sure that you know, we start to get that reflected across the union, which is very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
I was just kind of looking as well at some of my questions, and I wondered if there's any kind of particular campaigns that you'd like to see unions adopt. I remember talking about the menopause campaign, you know, earlier, and how we managed to get a policy adopted. And that's something we've done in West Berkshire Council, but is there any kind of similar to that that you think would be helpful that, you know, Unison nationally or locally took on to help women get more involved?
I think a really interesting one is bereavement support and leave. I know somebody who's campaigning at government level for more bereavement leave for people. At the moment, there's nothing much really in law for that, and it's not supportive, because a bereavement of a close family member is a significant event, and it may take, you know, more than just a few days. It could take weeks, months for you to be in a position where you're well enough to go back to work, because it will impact your mental health. I think that's one thing I'd like to see. I'd also like to see, because my fibromyalgia and I also have arthritis do affect, I'm starting to consider them disabilities now. That was a really tough word to start using. But I really do think we need to start flipping that on its head and looking at how people aren't disabled, but the world around them is disabling them by not being accessible enough. And that there's simply not enough there's not enough being done out there to make workplaces and even jobs accessible. Simple stuff we're missing out on. I remember I once went to a conference where the ramp onto the stage was a bit of like plywood, and it was at such an angle that several people nearly, in their mobility chairs and scooters, nearly went over backwards. And that was at a conference. That shouldn't be happening. That wasn't Unite, by the way, just make that quite clear. And so I think there needs to be done around disability access. We have the equality laws, but in reality, there's something simple like there's only stairs out of a car park, or sometimes the lifts don't work, but that's not okay, because if you've then got 4 flights of stairs and every step is painful, that's really is preventing you from doing your job. And so I think more needs to be done around disability as well. Quite serious work. And I think, with my council head on as well, more needs to be done in planning too. And when new buildings are built, they need to ask people with disabilities what needs to be done, not assuming they know what needs to be done. Always ask the people who you're fighting for what needs to happen. Don't assume you know. You can't live in everybody's shoes. You can't do that. It's impossible.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think, this year's Unison, they're doing this year with the disabled worker. And I'd like to kind of do stuff on that later on in the year. And I think you're right in that quite often, even when people are asked, they ask them to look good, but then nothing's done. Like I know in example in Reading, Reading West Station, they talked about upgrading it for years. There's been no way to get across the 2 platforms, and there's been no wheelchair access. They said they're going to upgrade it. They're upgrading the whole station. They're not putting any disabled access. So you're going to think, what was the point in the upgrade if you weren't doing the thing you said you were going to do it for?
And as a councillor that covers that area, it's made me so angry, because they're putting in the space for lifts, but they haven't got the funding to put the lifts in, and that should be a very, very basic part of any kind of upgrade or new development. It has to be fully accessible. What's the point? Because
that's what I thought the whole point of the upgrade was, and then it never put the lifts in. So it's like, why are you doing it at that point? Yeah.
Every meeting, can we have lifts? No, there's no money. The government should put the money in to make sure that everybody can access that facility, because it's stairs. It's a long ramp with stairs at the top, or on the other side it's stairs. And if even if you've got just something low level like arthritis like I do, sometimes the prospect of a flight of stairs is going to put you off.
Yeah.
Let alone if you need to use a mobility aid or a wheelchair. Not enough being done.
Yeah, I feel like a lot more needs to be done around, lots of buildings. And on top of that as well, I kind of think linked into what you were saying earlier about caring responsibilities, do you think more needs to be done flexible work-wise when it comes to, I think there was the Unison, they sort of mentioned it. I don't think it's like a main campaign at the moment, but I think it was mentioned partly by Unison National that when people sign up to a job, they should have flexible working on day one. They shouldn't have to wait to get flexible working. So, if you've got care responsibilities or if you've got a disability, that you're able to, still get fair representations in jobs and go for the same jobs that everyone else goes for and get that help you need from day one.
I think the last 2 years have taught us that flexible working, remote working have always, well, not always, but most recently been entirely possible. But employers just either didn't want to put the infrastructure in or didn't trust their members of staff to work as hard as they do within the office when they're being, monitored constantly. And I think the last 2 years have shown that that's not the case. I think there are some statistics that show home working has seen in some sectors no drop in productivity and in some cases an increase in productivity. It also means, we can work more flexibly. Understandably, some jobs you can't work flexibly because you need to be there for a certain period of time to cover shifts, for example. But for work, working like the job I do, they're entirely flexible. So, if I needed to, I could move my hours around. If I had to get to an appointment or get a child here, there or somewhere else. And that means I'm more loyal to that employer. I'm more likely to put the hard work in because they trust me and I appreciate that trust. Whereas, in my previous jobs in the financial services, you were being monitored for every single thing that you did, which you had to put on a spreadsheet to work out how productive you were every single day. That didn't motivate anybody. All it did is grind people down and give them mental health problems, stress, because they weren't hitting these numbers that were, I don't know who they monitored to get those numbers in. And we could have done those jobs from home. We could have worked more flexibly and they could have been more understanding to people's different life phases and how they affect their work, rather than just piling on the pressure and the guilt and making people basically compete for a pay rise, because that's how it works when you've got performance related pay. They've got the bell curve of who's going to get the lowest, who's going to get the middle, who's going to get the highest pay rises. It's unfair. It's blatantly unfair, and I just think it's an old-fashioned way of working now. And an interesting thing that I'm following quite avidly is looking into the 4-day week, where employers are reducing your working week hours but not reducing your pay. And they've found that it actually can increase your productivity. And it's been known for a long time that part-time workers, who are in the main women, are more productive because you're putting an intensive amount of work in over a short period of time. If you try to stretch that amount of work that hard over a full week, it would be impossible. So they need to just think more, think in a more modern fashion. Treat workers better, give us a better work-life balance, and the chances are you'll get more out of us because we're not exhausted.
Yeah, it's a two-way street, isn't it, really? And at West Berkshire Council, we've currently got these proposals they're trying to put through at the moment, and it's going to massively negatively affect people's work-life balance. And we're trying to say that a moment of high stress, you shouldn't be putting people under more stress. That's not going to help people work more effectively or be happy in their workplace. You should be doing the opposite if you want to, retain workers and make people happy. It's
more carrots, fewer sticks. And I think you'll
exactly.
find that it's a complete change in the way employers think. It's a very old-fashioned way of thinking, isn't it? That you treat an employee and monitor everything they do is going to get more out of them, because in reality it really doesn't work. If you treat us better, pay as well, you'll get more.
Exactly. Yeah.
You'll get more from us, more loyalty as well, less staff turnover.
Out of interest as well, Joan, I've got a small warning that's popped up on my screen saying there's 5 minutes left because I haven't got Zoom Pro. Is there any questions that you wanted to ask Sarah as well for the end, Joan?
Yeah, sorry, it wouldn't unmute. So I'm quite interested. I find that when we were talking about we were balloting people recently about the pay rise and would they be prepared to take industrial action or any kind of direct action, I find women had much less, were much less prepared to do that than male colleagues. And I just wondered if you found something similar, and is there any way that we could maybe encourage women to take more direct action?
I've been in quite a few lots of industrial action. We were quite militant. You quite often see us outside our office building, even if it was at the old Prudential building, or at one point we were in Reading Bridge House waving our placards, because I've been at least 3 or 4 strikes. I think the main concern is financial, because if you don't work, then the impact would be on your family. potentially you'll lose income and therefore you won't be able to pay the bills. I think women think about that more. With Unite, we got strike pay, so it was mostly compensated, and that meant a lot more people came out. And also a lot, obviously, because the thresholds for the ballots on industrial action are higher than they were, we'd be able to get across that threshold and also have people out protesting. And I suppose we talked about it within our teams about how we were going to strike. I was very, vocal about how I definitely would go and strike and why. And it's important to get that message across and also talk about successes, because, how often do we see strike action in our town nowadays? But there are successes. It does work. It's uncomfortable for a short while, but eventually, some of the time it does pay dividends, like it did for us in the finance sector. So I think the main concern is pay, and also I suppose it's a bit of a frightening step, isn't it, going on strike? But I've done it, and it was a good experience in the sense of the camaraderie on the picket line. People as they drive past on the picket line beeping and waving their support, and people bringing you cakes and sweets to support you. And you need to understand that part of it as well. It is uncomfortable, and you may be worried about losing your pay, but you have to remember you are protected as a trade union member, and ultimately you're fighting for a really good reason, and that is for yourself, but also ultimately for your colleagues as well, and the people that come after you. As they start chipping away at your terms and conditions, they're not going to, it's very unlikely that they'll get better as people come through the ranks or as the years go by. So you're like on the front line really of saving your T's and C's. So yeah, get out there, get on the picket line and wave those placards. It's a good thing.
I've got a thing for them with 1 minute and 20 seconds left, but that's a very good place to end it, to get people out on the picket line to waving placards. Yeah, I think that's been a really helpful session. I think that's been excellent, Sarah. I think all of that information you've given us and the stories you've given us, when we put this out to our members, I think they're going to really enjoy listening to what you have to say. And yeah, thank you for coming to speak to us today.
Anytime.
Sorry about the technical issues at the start, by the way.
Oh well, these things are sent to try us. But no, it's a pleasure. I'll happily try and encourage people into trade union movement. I think it's vital.
Yeah, and we're definitely at this cost of living crisis at this time, isn't it? We need trade unions now more than ever. Definitely.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. That's brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you for hosting this with me as well, Joan.
Thanks, Joan.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.